very, very happy to see that I am sitting between you and Prime Minister Narendra Modi in that picture. Let us begin by what are you showing him here?
I'm showing him a headline from the Australian Financial Review, which says Australia needs data, not drama, in its relationship with India. And that was my own article in that day's Australian Financial Review to coincide with Mr. Modi's visit to Sydney. And the fact was that prior to his visit, we'd had a series of articles in the Australian press suggesting that Australia should not be cozying up to India, should not be doing business with India because of its terrible human rights record. And what I did in the article was present the facts about India's human rights record, which are, really very positive.
Data, not drama. I think that's quite a catchy phrase. So I'll go
Oh, it
back.
was the only thing he said in English in our entire in our entire meeting. He said, "Data, not drama." That's very good. And then he switched to Hindi, and
I see, I see. Uh, So now tell me, how important is data as a social scientist, and the way data is gathered and presented, many times it lacks objectivity. And so what is your take on that?
our real problem is that in the lack of data, it's possible for people to spin any narrative they want to project. I mean, there's always some incident you can point to, whether it's about India or the United States or any other country. You can always point to an incident and say, look, this terrible thing happened. But is that terrible thing broadly representative of the country? So in India's case, you could point to a lynching, and you could say, look, Muslims or Dalits face serious violence in India. Look at this terrible lynching that occurred. And then you pull back and, well, actually in India, we have data about lynchings. The Indian government's very good about collecting this. And once we look at the systematic data, we can see that the patterns of lynchings are not what activists would claim. They're relatively low numbers, but probably more importantly, from the perspective of analysis, the patterns don't suggest that any group is particularly targeted by lynchings. And it's the same in the United States. So, I recently wrote a paper, as you know, on the weaponization of caste in America. And there's been one allegation in California of caste-based discrimination at Cisco Systems. Now, even that allegation seems very weak. It seems to be falling apart. But one allegation of discrimination might be true. There might be one person who is, I don't believe that the people in the Cisco case are anti-Dalit. But it's possible for one person to be anti-Dalit. That's not the same as there being a pattern of anti-Dalit discrimination in the country. And so we need systematic statistics that are representative. That's the key. They can't just be anecdotal statistics. They have to be comprehensive and representative of the population in order to really come to any picture of the world.
So now, as we're talking about data, then we're also talking about America. We're talking about Hindu children, and I'll come to America via India, and that too with the reference of education. There have been reports that a lot of history was not taught the way it was, as far as India's cultural history is concerned, and few things were highlighted, few things were sort of brushed aside, etc. And there was also probably a conscious narrative that was gradually being built. Now people are trying to sort of look from a different angle also, and that is a big thing happening right now. Some people say there is sort of renaissance, or how do you see this? We will come to America, and I think everything is interrelated. Yeah.
Look, if most Americans know one thing or believe they know one thing about India, it's that India is a Hindu country. Now, any Indian knows that India is a secular state that makes has no discrimination based on religion. In India, I guess there are reservations. I know there are always ifs, ands, and buts, but fundamentally, India is a secular state that does not preference Hindus in any legal sense. Yet Americans believe it's a Hindu state. If you ask Americans the second thing about India, they'll say that it has a caste system. Now, that knowledge may be 150 years out of date. That knowledge may be highly stylized. They may not know what caste actually is, because again, if you ask people what caste is, if they have any knowledge of caste, which is unlikely, they'll believe it's Brahmins and Dalits. Oh, there are two castes in India. The Brahmins oppress the Dalits. Well, again, neither Brahmin nor Dalit is a caste as such. Their caste groups are specific, um, uh, specific groups of people who generally share last names, or generally patrilineal, or generally form it through family or perpetuated through family formation. This is not what a Brahmin is. This is not what a Dalit is. So all of these misunderstandings are highly stylized and based on ignorance. Now, it'd be bad enough if that were just true of the general population. After all, the general population also can't tell you what algebra is, even though most of them have had an algebra class at some point. The problem is it's also embedded in the textbooks. So when you see an algebra textbook, you can be pretty sure that 99.9% of the algebra in the book is correct. Yeah, occasionally there's a misprint, but we have algebra down pretty well in the educational system. Social science is not that way. So when you have a segment on the Hindu faith or on India in an American social science textbook, it will simply repeat these kind of outdated, time-worn, never were correct understandings, because the people who are writing these social science textbooks either, one, are not themselves competent on the issue, or two, they're competent, but they're highly politicized, and they want to put across a particular agenda. And that's really the issue we're dealing with when it comes to education and perceptions about the Hindu faith in the United States.
Okay, so now education plays an important role in overall development of the personality of the child. It also plays an important role in the kind of impression that she is imbibing at her education institute, or in the social circle where she is moving. What I'm referring to is, if the kind of practices that the child is observing at home are derided upon by people whom he looks or she looks up to as authoritarian figures, and the kind of material that they have in the books that are being taught,
Yeah.
it puts child in a state of confusion, as was the term American born confused desi, and sometimes that confusion is consciously increased to put them away from their traditional practices, which are ritualistic and
Yeah.
religion. But there's another side to it also, which you have brought through your paper also, the weaponization. So let us leave the practice side aside for religious scholars and practitioners. But as a social scientist, how do you see Hindu parents should be considered? Because the way their child, who is actually not practicing completely the Hindu faith, because he is also questioning what his parents are doing at home, bringing the mindset which he is gathering from other surroundings. Now, over to you.
I doubt. Look, I'm not a parent, and I'm not a Hindu parent in the United States. So I have to go simply on what I read in the press and what I've learned from talking to people and reading research. My impression is that Hindu children are not themselves confused about their own identity. That is, I believe if they were isolated from American society and simply operating in their family space, in their temple space, they probably would have a pretty good grasp of who they are, or at least as good a grasp as Christian children do. I mean, let's not pretend that Christian children know all about their own faith or understand their own faith. Okay. The problem is that Hindu children socialize in a largely either Christian or secular atheist environment. And when they socialize that in that environment, their friends have a gross misunderstanding. So whereas the Hindu child may take his or her knowledge of the Hindu faith from their parents, the social environment takes that knowledge of the Hindu faith either from textbooks or from dimly remembered knowledge of textbooks or from a mention in a film. And that knowledge of the Hindu faith is very cursory and extraordinarily misplaced. I'll just give you one example. In my own family, everyone knows that I've now been studying India, and they know I've been involved with Hindu and Indian issues. I have a niece, age 13, who literally told me, she was informing me at the dinner table, as 13-year-olds will, about the Hindu faith. And she just said flat out, Hindus worship cows. Right? That was, in her mind, what it means to be Hindu is that they worship cows. Christians worship God. Hindus worship cows.
Oh man.
Now, of course, that's ridiculous. But this is a very intelligent, well-informed by her own standards, well-informed 13-year-old who probably has had one day of class, one 45-minute class period that mentioned the Hindu faith in her entire social science education. And this is a misimpression that she received because somewhere in that one paragraph of text in her social science textbook, it mentioned cow veneration. And so the impression left was, and so imagine the Hindu child now at a sleepover party with a group of ordinary American 13-year-olds, and the others are teasing this child, why do you worship cows? If you worship a cow, why do you eat them? Because, of course, many Hindus eat beef. And of course, for the Hindu child, this is a very, potentially stressful environment. Unless the Hindu child is thoroughly convinced of her Hindu faith, unless this is a Hindu child who's been brought up, Sanskrit classes on Sunday, temple every week, rituals every day in the home, unless this child is thoroughly grounded in the Hindu faith, the child will be put in socially untenable situations. Now, multiply that out. Now, I warned you at the beginning not to trust to anecdotes. Don't trust to my anecdote. You have to do some broader investigation around this. We don't have systematic survey data, so I can't tell you systematically what do American children think they know about the Hindu faith. But more broadly, I think parents should be asking their children, asking their children's friends, what do you know about the Hindu faith? Try to get some knowledge about this. I suspect that parents will find a thorough ignorance among most Americans of the Hindu faith.
Let me just...
And that ignorance affects their own children. That's that's really the nub of the matter.
So I just wanted to bring to your attention, as far as I know, majority Hindus wouldn't consider eating beef. Majority, of course, there might be exceptions. I don't know about that, but that reference of worshipping cow is...
Well, look, we have survey data in India that a large minority of Hindus eat beef. Not a majority, but there's a substantial minority of Hindus who do eat beef. I'm sorry to contradict you. That we do have survey data on. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying that, it's a fact of life. But it's something that, it would not be uncommon for a Hindu child in America to go with her friends to McDonald's and have a hamburger. It may be right or wrong. I'm not here to argue, is it right or wrong? I'm saying, has it happened that the child of Hindu parents has had a hamburger at McDonald's? Absolutely.
The reason I brought it is because many people perceive it the way I said it, and they may sort of see it differently. But I'm glad you clarified, and there might be survey. And what I just wanted to add also is, when the reference that Hindus worship cow is made, it remains in Hindu families as a reverential attitude towards cows. But worshipping cows is an integral part of the total flow of devotion, but that will be a different topic. And coming back to what you said, what can be done as far as the concern of Hindu parents from the point of view of the understanding which is being accumulated by their children?
So I don't want to have a theological debate, but I do want to clarify what I've said. When my 13-year-old niece says that Hindu worships cows, she doesn't mean in a sophisticated sense Hindus practice cow veneration as a part of a broader respect for all of life and for that gives us life through its milk, and that the cow stands in as an embodiment for God, who through the cow sustains human beings. She doesn't mean that.
Okay.
What she believes is that, the Christian God is an old man in heaven, and the Hindu God is a cow. Right? That's the level of misunderstanding that we're dealing with. And of course, that makes it very difficult for Hindu parents because their children are constantly, if their children publicly display their Hinduness, then they're constantly bombarded with these questions in a way that Christian children aren't. Because if you're a child of, let's say, mostly secular Christians, you go to church twice a year on Easter and Christmas, you don't pray at night, the typical American Christian, no one will question your Christianity, even if your Christianity is very lightly worn. All it consists of is singing Christmas carols and vaguely believing in a God, but not having read the Bible. Okay, that level of Christianity will be accepted by everybody, and no one will ask about your faith. No one will question your faith. It's considered very impolite. We'll all just let it, people will all just let it go. Even growing up as atheists in America, and I was never religious even as a child, unless I made a point of it, unless I stated my lack of faith in God, it never was an issue. However, if you look Indian, if people question, are you Hindu? What's that? If there is, if you're a Hindu who's similarly not highly religiously motivated, and let's face it, most Hindus, like most Christians, are only passingly religious. They're not conducting, nightly rituals in the home. They're not praying every day. Well, then you have a socially difficult situation among children. And not just socially, sometimes even in the classroom, because, again, even if American schools are secular, there's a broad sense in American schools that, well, you're either Christian or you might be Jewish. People are aware of what Jewish means. There's now a very public knowledge of Islam because there's been so much work done to combat Islamophobia that if you're Muslim, that will be accepted. Hindu will still seem like an other. It'll seem like something strange and something that the child has to justify in a way that if you're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, you don't have to justify why do you believe in your faith, because everyone just accepts it. The Hindu child is put in the position of either hiding her or his Hindu faith or having to justify it, which creates a very high stress situation for teens and preteens in America.
So the way you have described looks like you know ins and outs very well. Now the question is how to address this situation as a parent. Anything that can be done individually or collectively? Any ideas that you may share?
That's very difficult. So the Jewish response, if I can just use a parallel example, has been to be very public about Judaism. So not to hide it. Before the Holocaust, it was very common for Jews to hide their Jewishness. After the Holocaust, Jewish organizations strongly promoted that Jews should be very public about their Jewishness to normalize it by being very present at all times with their Jewish faith. And I suspect that route is also the only viable route for American Hindus. Remember, American Hindus are not Indian Hindus. In India, Hindus face the same sort of social milieu that Christians face in the United States. Everyone will just assume you're Hindu unless you make a bother about it. In the United States, of course, Hindus are a tiny minority, 1.5% of the U.S. population.
Here I bring, sorry, I'll bring some, call it information or observation by a parent whose son was studying at an important university or well-known university in Delhi. And he said that if he goes with the tilak on his forehead, that is the Hindu symbol, then he is laughed and people make fun of him.
Mhm.
But in the same university, if a Muslim girl comes with that explicit way of demonstrating, then they say that she has the conviction in her faith, etc.
Right.
So in India also.
No. But ironically, this is actually illustrating beautifully what I'm trying to explain.
Mhm.
In India, you don't have to wear a tika to show you're Hindu, because everyone's just going to assume you're Hindu. And by one word for it is by ostentatiously portraying your Hindu faith, you're actually making a statement within that society. and you're visibly identifying yourself. In the same way in America, everyone will assume that you're Christian, but if you wear a gold cross, now you're seen as being, oh, you're not just Christian, you're a, forgive me, these are the sort of words 13-year-olds use. You're one of those God people, right? You're one of the, okay. So it makes it, so in the same way that wearing a tikka in India is a display of faith, in the same way wearing a cross in an American school would be unusual. And those who saw you would think, oh, you must be an evangelical. You must be someone who's strongly associated with particular church. Now, in America, Jews have taken the strategy of being very visible in the public space. So Jewish boys wearing the yarmulke, specifically because otherwise Jews will not be noticed. And no one will know that there are Jewish people in their midst. And in the same way, I would recommend that American Hindus consider that they might consider wearing the tikka all the time, not because they're especially religious, or you're not wearing one right now in this interview because it would be unprofessional in a news or in a news environment. However, wearing that every day, or wearing a sacred thread, maybe less confrontational for children, wearing a sacred thread every day is something that just says we're present in this community.
Wonderful.
And that, I think, is probably the key towards normalizing Hinduness in the United States, is making it visible that people are present and they are Hindu.
So I don't remember the name, but some activist from the Dalit faith mentioned after inauguration of the big Hindu temple in New Jersey that the rise of Hindu temples in America is a cause of concern for them because they spread divisive ways and casteism, etc., which is totally untrue. But this was covered by several important newspapers. So, I mean, you have to deal with whatever perception people make, or try to have others take their side of perception. I want to go with you to India because I'm looking at Prime Minister's smile sitting with you, and I think you are closely following Indian politics, so you are aware that in recent state elections, there has been quite an encouraging result for Prime Minister Modi's leadership. And as we were talking about religious symbols, I think he's the first Prime Minister who didn't shy that he comes from Hindu faith, and he wears tilak on his forehead. You must have seen those pictures, or him meditating at Kedarnath or things like that.
Right.
But leaving aside the general superficial image, when I say superficial, images are also now a form of statement, and the way you carry yourself makes a lot of difference. Uh, Looking at the role of Prime Minister Modi in terms of cultural awareness, not just amongst Indians but also globally, do you see there is sort of a shift in perception about when I say cultural consciousness or awareness? Somewhere, if I may take just two, three more lines to mention that for many Hindus, Hindu culture and Hindu dharma or Hindu religions are so intertwined. So when you are referring to India, and as you said, many people think this is a Hindu country. So somewhere that concept has multi layers to it. Coming back to Modiji's impact, as per you, on the cultural awareness globally.
Uh, Certainly, Mr. Modi has been a brand ambassador for India, and I don't think that his Hinduness is a problem for anybody except for a small number of journalists and human rights activists. It is the character. First of all, the character of the Indian state was highly contentious when it was created. And the concept of the secular state won out over the concept of the religious state. I think that's been a positive for India. I think it's been a good thing for India. But having a secular state does not mean that individual people or even politicians have to check their religion at the door. It simply means that there must be equality for people of all faiths. And I think that equality has been a foundation of the strength of Indian democracy and civil society over the last 80 years. That said, Mr. Modi being very publicly Hindu is no more a problem than Rishi Sunak being very publicly Hindu, or Vivek Ramaswamy, or anybody else. Most people, I think, respect people of faith.